Good evening, kiddo. I am so thankful that you are here with me and that I am able to share this story with you. This story holds a special place in my heart, and I hope that you will enjoy it as much as I do. Some nights feel like old radio nights, like the world is farther away, like the room is its own small island, and the rain is the ocean around it. Those are the nights I like best, because stories fit better inside them. Tonight, I want to tell you about a man who didn't look like a miracle. He didn't have movie star swagger. He didn't have a smooth path. He didn't have the kind of life that gets handed to you clean. He was a working man, a husband, a father, and for a little while, in the hardest years America ever lived through, he became the heavyweight champion of the world. His name was James J. Braddock. They called him many things: the Bulldog of Bergen, Jersey Jim, and the name that stuck the most, the Cinderella Man. This is a story about boxing, yes, but more than that, it's a story about the Great Depression, about pride, about hunger, about a man who kept getting up even when the world didn't clap for it. So settle in, let your breath slow down, and I'll tell you about James J. Braddock. Chapter 1. Before the title, before the name. James Walter Braddock was born in 1905 in New York City. He grew up around New Jersey and New York, around the kind of neighborhoods where work was physical and honest, and you learned early that nothing was promised. He was Irish American, and like many families in those communities, they didn't talk much about dreams. They talked about shifts, rent, food, tomorrow. Braddock wasn't raised as a celebrity. He was raised as a kid who needed to be tough. Not tough like loud, tough like durable. He stepped into boxing young, not because it was glamorous, because it was a way to earn. His first recorded ring fight came in the early 1920s, and soon he was fighting professionally. He grew into a style that fit his life. Not fancy, not wasteful. Braddock was known for counterpunching, for spoiling a prettier fighter's rhythm, and for carrying a dangerous right hand when his body allowed it. In the late 1920s, he had real momentum. In 1928, he scored a major upset over Tuffy Griffiths, knocking him out. Upsets matter in boxing. They change your address. They change your meals. They change who says your name. Then, in 1929, he fought Tommy Loughran in a 15-round decision and lost. That's the kind of fight that can break a man quietly. Not because you lose, but because you touch the edge of the mountain and it doesn't let you stand on top. And that fight did more than hurt his feelings. During that period, Braddock badly fractured his right hand. A boxer's hand is not just a hand. It's his paycheck. It's his defense. It's his future. And a broken hand can turn a contender into a question. After that, Braddock's record went cold. His next stretch was rough. He lost more than he won. He fought through pain. He fought while compromised. And then the world outside the ring collapsed too. The stock market crash, the banks failing, jobs disappearing. The Great Depression arrived like winter, and Braddock, like millions of other working men, found himself standing in line for work. Chapter 2: The Depression Years and the Docks. This is the part of Braddock's story that makes him belong to your channel. Because it's not about sport here. It's about survival. Braddock had a wife named May Fox. They married in 1930, and they had 3 children, Jay, Howard, and Rosemary. The Depression does something to families. It turns small decisions into emergencies. Milk becomes a calculation. Shoes become an argument. Rent becomes a threat you hear in your sleep. Braddock couldn't box consistently because his hand kept failing him. And the money from boxing was not steady. Some accounts of the era describe fighters being paid a fraction of what they once earned as the economy tightened, with purses shrinking and opportunities drying up. Braddock's family fell deep enough that he had to accept government relief. And for a man like him, that wasn't just assistance. It felt like humiliation. Wikipedia notes he was forced to work on the docks and collect social assistance to feed his family. Now, kiddo, I want you to picture something. Picture a man who once fought under bright lights, now standing on a cold pier, hands in his pockets, waiting for someone to point at him and say, you work today. That kind of system existed. If there was work, you got picked. If there wasn't, you went home, empty. Braddock worked as a longshoreman, hard labor. And because his right hand was fragile, he started relying more on his left. He used the left hand to lift, haul, carry. And over time, the left hand grew stronger. That detail matters, because in a strange way, the docks rebuilt him. Not like a gym, like life does. Slowly, harshly, honestly. There's also a note in his story about dignity and faith. Wikipedia describes Braddock being inspired by the Catholic worker movement, and later returning relief money and donating to Catholic worker houses. That tells you the kind of man he was. Not perfect, but proud in a way that pointed outward. Proud enough to want to pay back what he was given. Chapter 3: The Comeback nobody expected. By the early 1930s, Braddock's career looked finished. Not on pause. Finished. Old in fighting years. Injured. Poor. And then the story turns. In 1934, Braddock got a fight against a heavyweight contender named Corn Griffin. Corn Griffin had a nickname, too. They called him the Ozark Cyclone. The idea was simple. Braddock would be a stepping stone, a name to build Griffin. But Braddock knocked him out. A stunning upset. Wikipedia records Braddock stopping Griffin in the third round. When a man has been counted out long enough, he starts to fight like he has nothing to lose, and that can be dangerous. After that, Braddock fought John Henry Lewis, a future Hall of Fame light heavyweight champion, and Braddock beat him. That win mattered because it wasn't a fluke. It was evidence. Evidence that he wasn't just surviving, he was returning. Then he beat Art Lasky in a 15-round fight. And that win put him in the conversation for something crazy. A title shot. The heavyweight championship. The richest, loudest crown in American sports. And the champion then was Max Baer. Max Baer was not a quiet man. He was charismatic, powerful, dangerous. He was the kind of champion people assumed would be champion. And Braddock. Braddock was the man you didn't assume anything about anymore. The odds were brutal. Britannica notes odds around 10-1 against Braddock. That means if you put down $1 on Braddock, people thought you were throwing it away. The fight happened on June 13th, 1935, at the Madison Square Garden Bowl in Queens. A summer night. The kind of night where people go because they want to see something dramatic. Most of them expected Baer to knock Braddock out. They wanted blood and certainty. But boxing is not a sport of certainty. Chapter 4. The Night the Country Needed. This is where Braddock becomes more than a fighter. He becomes a symbol. Because the Great Depression was still squeezing people. If you had money, you were scared of losing it. If you didn't have money, you were scared of never getting it. People needed a story that said the world could flip, that the strong could be surprised, that the poor man could win. Braddock fought Baer with discipline. He didn't chase. He didn't play Baer's game. He boxed. He survived the big moments. He stole rounds. He did what underdogs have to do. He made the favorite uncomfortable. After 15 rounds, Braddock won by decision. BoxRec records it as a 15-round unanimous decision. And just like that, James J. Braddock was heavyweight champion of the world. A sports writer named Damon Runyon famously called him the Cinderella Man. Runyon even wrote a column headlined The Cinderella Man the day after the fight, describing the fairy tale feeling of Braddock's win. That nickname wasn't just clever, it was perfect, because Braddock's life had felt like ashes and labor, and suddenly, for one night, he was at the ball. But here's what Grandpa wants you to understand. Even after you win a championship, life doesn't stop being life. Bills don't stop. Fear doesn't stop. The pressure doesn't stop. Sometimes the title just makes it louder. Chapter 5. Holding the Crown in a Hard World. Braddock was champion from 1935 to 1937. He didn't have a long reign, but he had a meaningful one, because his championship didn't belong only to him. It belonged to everyone who had stood in a line for bread and still tried to smile when they got home. There was controversy in this period. Fans wanted certain fights. The boxing world was never just sport. It was politics, money, promoters. Some wanted Braddock to fight Max Schmeling. Others wanted him to fight Joe Louis. And Joe Louis was rising like a storm. Eventually, Braddock agreed to fight Joe Louis. The fight was set for June 22, 1937, at Comiskey Park in Chicago. The titles were on the line, and Braddock was still the working man champion. But Joe Louis was something else. Joe Louis was the future. Chapter 6. Braddock versus Joe Louis and the deal that changed his life. The Braddock-Louis fight is famous for the result. Joe Louis won by knockout in the 8th round. But it's also famous for what happened behind the scenes, because Braddock was not going back to the docks, not after everything. So his manager, Joe Gould, made sure Braddock would be protected. Wikipedia notes that part of Braddock's contract involved receiving a portion of Louis's earnings over the next decade. And multiple boxing accounts describe a deal of about 10% over 10 years. A New York Post piece describes Braddock receiving 10% of Louis's earnings for 10 years. BoxRec's fight page describes a guaranteed purse and a share of profits from promoting Louis over the next decade. And the New Jersey Boxing Hall of Fame also summarizes the 10% structure. That's important because, in a way, Braddock's championship wasn't just a story of winning. It was a story of finally building security for his family. After the Louis fight, he used money to buy a home in North Bergen, New Jersey. a home, not a dream, a roof, a place where children could sleep without worrying about the next move. Now, about the fight itself. There's a moment early where Braddock knocked Lewis down. Wikipedia's fight summary describes Lewis being dropped in the opening round and recovering, then gradually taking control with his jab and breaking Braddock down. Braddock's face became swollen and bloodied. His manager wanted to stop it. Braddock pushed on anyway, and in the 8th round, Lewis landed a left-right combination that ended it. That was Braddock's only knockout loss in his whole career. Think about that. All those fights, all those rounds, all those nights. Only Joe Louis stopped him that way. And Louis, years later, reportedly greeted Braddock with the same words. "Hello, champ." Wikipedia even notes, Louis called no other heavyweight champion champ the way he did Braddock. That's respect. Not the loud kind, the quiet kind. Chapter 7. One more fight, then quiet life. After the Louis fight, Braddock fought once more. He fought Tommy Farr in 1938 and won. Then he retired. And the story becomes something your channel does well. It becomes small again, domestic, human. He stayed in North Bergen, raised his children. The championship belt didn't pay his grocery bill every week, but the deal he made and the money he earned kept his family from going back to desperation. Braddock lived until 1974. He was buried in New Jersey, and years later, his legacy was recognized in boxing history. He was inducted into the International Boxing Hall of Fame in 2001. A park in North Bergen is named for him. But if you ask Grandpa what his real legacy is, it's not the belt. It's the reminder that survival counts, that a man can be broken and still become a champion, that you can fall all the way to the docks and still climb back up. Chapter 8. Grandpa's Closing Thoughts. The kind of champion people needed. Some champions are fireworks. They burn bright. They make noise. They vanish fast. James J. Braddock was different. He was a coal stove. He burned steady, not pretty, but warm. He represented something people rarely admit they need. Not greatness, relief, hope. The idea that your worst year doesn't get the final word. So tonight, kiddo, as the rain keeps tapping the window and the room grows heavier, remember Braddock. Remember the docks. Remember the broken hand. Remember the line for work. Remember the way he kept walking forward anyway. And if you're carrying something hard in your own life, not a championship belt, not a public battle, just something quiet and heavy, then take this with you. You don't need to be flashy to be strong. You just need to keep going. Good night, kiddo. Chapter 9. The Night the Champion Waited. The night James J. Braddock fought Max Baer did not begin like a miracle. It began like every other fight night. Men smoking, crowds murmuring, vendors calling out, the air thick with anticipation and sweat. Braddock arrived early. He always did. He didn't like rushing. He didn't like feeling behind. Those habits come from working men. If you've ever waited on a dock to be picked for a shift, you learn to arrive before anyone can say you're late. Max Baer arrived differently. Baer smiled, joked, carried himself like the night already belonged to him. And maybe, in a way, it did. Most people in that stadium had paid to see Baer win. They didn't expect cruelty. They expected certainty. Braddock wrapped his hands slowly, carefully. His right hand still worried him, but his left felt solid. Years of lifting crates, years of hauling rope, years of working with pain instead of complaining about it. The bell rang, and from the first round, Braddock made it clear. This would not be easy. Chapter 10. 15 Rounds of Refusal. Braddock didn't chase Baer. That was important. Baer wanted chaos, wanted to lure Braddock into mistakes. Braddock stayed patient. He circled, he countered. He made Baer reset. Round by round, something strange happened. Baer began to slow. Not physically, mentally, because he wasn't winning cleanly. He was being forced to work, and work was not what champions expected back then. Braddock landed short punches, clean punches, not dramatic ones. The kind of punches that don't show up in highlight reels, but show up on scorecards. Between rounds, Braddock's corner stayed calm. They didn't shout. They talked like men who had been here before, not in the ring, in life. Baer had moments. He always did. He landed heavy shots that would have broken lesser men. Braddock absorbed them, folded slightly, and kept going. When the final bell rang, there was uncertainty in the crowd. That's never a good sign for a champion, because champions are supposed to remove doubt. The judges rendered their decision, and the crowd went quiet before it went loud. James J. Braddock, by unanimous decision, heavyweight champion of the world. Chapter 11. A champion who didn't celebrate. Braddock didn't leap onto the ropes. He didn't shout. He didn't collapse in tears. He simply stood there, breathing, processing, like a man who had just finished a long shift. Later, reporters asked him what he was thinking. He talked about his family, about rent, about food. He talked like a man who had learned not to trust sudden happiness. That's something Depression-era men shared. Joy was fragile. You didn't grab it too hard. You held it gently. The next morning, newspapers across the country told the story. They called it a miracle. They called it a fairy tale. But the men who had waited in bread lines understood it differently. To them, Braddock didn't look lucky. He looked familiar. Chapter 12. Being champion in a hungry nation. Being heavyweight champion in the 1930s was not easy. But being heavyweight champion during the Great Depression came with expectations no belt could satisfy. People wanted Braddock to represent them, to be proof that things could turn, proof that persistence mattered, proof that dignity was not dead. Braddock felt that weight. He didn't run from it, but he didn't enjoy it either. He was not a speechmaker. He was not a politician. He was a fighter who understood responsibility. When promoters argued about opponents, Braddock listened carefully. He didn't want to be reckless. He had been reckless once before. It had nearly cost him everything. He knew Joe Louis was coming. Everyone knew. Louis was younger, faster, stronger. Louis was the future. But Braddock had learned something. Sometimes the future waits for the past to finish its work. Chapter 13. The contract that changed a family. The deal Braddock made before fighting Joe Louis was one of the smartest decisions of his life. Not flashy, smart. Braddock and his manager insisted on security, not glory. They demanded a percentage of Joe Louis's future earnings, 10%, 10 years. Some people criticized it, said it was unfair, said Braddock was holding back progress. But Braddock had seen what progress did to men with no safety net. It left them behind. This wasn't greed. This was survival. After the Louis fight, Braddock never returned to relief lines, never returned to docks, never wondered how his children would eat. That is a different kind of victory. Chapter 14. Watching Joe Louis rise. Braddock watched Joe Louis become champion. He watched Louis defend the title again and again. and he never resented it. In fact, Braddock admired Lewis, respected him, and Lewis returned that respect, calling him champ long after the belt was gone. That kind of respect does not come from victory. It comes from understanding. Chapter 15. Quiet Years, Quiet Strength. After boxing, Braddock lived quietly. He did not chase fame. He did not trade on stories. He lived in New Jersey, raised his children, went to church, worked modest jobs. People sometimes forget this part. They think champions live forever in the spotlight. Most don't. Most return to regular life. And that transition is harder than winning a title. Braddock handled it with the same patience he handled everything else, one day at a time. Chapter 16. Grandpa's Final Reflection. What James J. Braddock really won. So what did James J. Braddock really win? A belt? Yes. Fame? Briefly. But what he really won was something rarer. Time. Time to raise his children without fear. Time to sleep without worry. Time to live without standing in line hoping someone pointed at him. He won the right to exhale. And that's what makes his story perfect for a rainy night. Because not all victories are loud. Some victories are quiet enough to let you rest. So tonight, kiddo, as the rain keeps tapping the window and the world feels far away, remember James J. Braddock. Remember the docks. Remember the broken hand. Remember the night the underdog refused to go away. And remember this: you don't have to win everything. You just have to endure long enough to win what matters. Good night. The rain will stay a while longer.